My husband stood up at our family Sunday dinner, clinked his crystal wine glass, and proudly announced he was giving our $2.4 million villa to his sister. He handed me a piece of paper, told me I had 24 hours to pack my bags and leave, and said his divorce lawyer would call me in the morning. He had a smug smile on his face. What he did not know was that the fraudulent document in his hand was about to send him straight to federal prison and leave his entire family completely ruined. My name is Audrey. I am 33 years old and I work as a corporate restructuring consultant. I spend my days analyzing financial ruins, liquidating toxic assets, and legally dismantling fraudulent companies. I am trained to spot a bad investment from a mile away. But somehow I missed the biggest liability of all sitting right across my own dining table. It was a beautiful Sunday evening in Calabasas, California. The sunset was spilling golden light across the marble countertops of my custom kitchen and illuminating the expensive artwork I had carefully curated for my home. I had spent the entire afternoon cooking a prime rib roast for my husband Derek and his family. Derek is 35 and works as a middle manager at a boutique insurance brokerage. He always liked to play the role of the big shot provider, even though his salary barely covered the maintenance fees on the house we lived in. Sitting around my custom oak dining table were Derek, his mother Barbara, his younger sister Megan, and Megan's husband Devin. Devin is 34, a smooth-talking African-American tech bro who is always pitching some new revolutionary app that never actually launches. I had just poured the last of an expensive Cabernet when Derek abruptly stood up. He picked up his silver fork and tapped it aggressively against his wineglass. The sharp clinking sound cut through the ambient jazz music playing in the background. I smiled at him genuinely, thinking he was going to make a heartfelt toast to his sister's recent wedding anniversary. Instead, he reached into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick, folded manila envelope. He tossed it onto the center of the table right next to the expensive floral centerpiece. Derek looked at Megan and Devin with a sickeningly proud grin. "Happy anniversary, you two," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance and unearned confidence. "I know you guys have been looking for a proper place to settle down and build your startup headquarters, Devin. So I have decided to give you this house. The quitclaim deed is right there in the envelope. I signed it this afternoon. It is all yours." The table went dead silent for a fraction of a second, before Megan squealed in absolute delight and lunged across the chairs to hug her brother. I sat there totally frozen, my fingers tightly gripping the stem of my wine glass, trying to process the absolute absurdity of what had just come out of his mouth. Derek then turned his cold, unsympathetic eyes toward me. The affectionate husband I had woken up next to that morning was completely gone. In his place was a stranger drunk on his own perceived power and fueled by his family's greed. "Audrey," he said, his tone flat, robotic, and entirely dismissive, "this marriage is clearly not working out anymore. I am giving this house to my family because they actually need it. You have 24 hours to pack your personal belongings and leave my property. My lawyer will be sending you the divorce papers first thing tomorrow morning. Do not try to make a scene or drag this out in court. It will only make things harder for you." Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to watch someone you loved reveal their true toxic colors in the blink of an eye. You will definitely want to hear how I handled the sheer audacity of this man and his greedy family. I slowly looked around the dining table, observing their reactions. My mother-in-law Barbara was not shocked or appalled by her son's cruel behavior. She was grinning from ear to ear, practically vibrating with excitement. Devin was already leaning back in his chair, swirling his wine, and looking around my vaulted-ceiling living room like he was the new king of the castle. This was clearly not a spontaneous decision made in the heat of the moment. This was a highly calculated, premeditated ambush orchestrated by his entire family to strip me of everything I owned. They had planned this dinner specifically to humiliate me and kick me out onto the street. But as I stared at the manila envelope resting on the table, my initial shock quickly transformed into a cold, calculating rage. Derek had made one monumental, fatal miscalculation. Before I could even open my mouth to respond to Derek, Devin leaned forward and rested his elbows on my custom dining table. He flashed a brilliant, entirely unearned smile. He had the kind of polished Silicon Valley aesthetic that masked a complete lack of actual business acumen. He adjusted his expensive designer glasses, the ones I knew Derek had put on his credit card last Christmas, and let out a condescending chuckle. "Let us be real for a second, Audrey," Devin said, his voice smooth but dripping with disrespect. "You are a corporate consultant. You review spreadsheets for a living. You make decent money, sure, but you do not make Calabasas villa money. Keeping a 5-bedroom house for one woman who works 70 hours a week is just a massive misallocation of resources. It is basically a tragedy. You are barely even here to enjoy the square footage." I stared at him, my expression completely flat. The audacity of this man was almost impressive. Over the past 6 years, Devin had launched and subsequently crashed no less than 5 separate companies. There was the cryptocurrency exchange that folded in 3 months. Then came the custom sneaker app that never made it past the beta testing phase. After that, it was a drop-shipping business that ended with a warehouse full of defective electronics and a massive lawsuit. Every single time he managed to fail upwards, mostly because he knew exactly how to flatter my husband's fragile ego. Devin took a slow sip of his wine, clearly enjoying the sound of his own voice. "Meanwhile, my new tech startup is on the verge of securing Series A funding," he continued, gesturing vaguely in the air as if painting a picture of his imaginary empire. "We are building an artificial intelligence-driven logistics platform. It is going to revolutionize the supply chain industry. But to attract top-tier developers and venture capitalists, we need a proper headquarters. We cannot be operating out of our cramped 2-bedroom apartment anymore. This house is perfect. The vaulted ceilings in your living room will make an incredible open-concept workspace. We are going to rip out those ridiculous silk drapes and bring in standing desks." Megan nodded enthusiastically, reaching over to squeeze Devin's hand. "And the master suite will be perfect for us when we finally decide to start a family," she chimed in, glaring at me pointedly. "A house like this needs life, Audrey. It needs children and energy and innovation. Not just one lonely woman hoarding space she does not even truly own." I looked from Megan to Devin, then back to Derek. Derek was puffing out his chest, clearly relishing his role as the benevolent patriarch who was single-handedly funding the next big tech unicorn. Derek always wanted to be seen as an angel investor, a visionary who spotted talent and nurtured it. He made $60,000 a year pushing insurance policies, but in his mind, handing over my property made him Elon Musk. Devin smirked and leaned back, crossing his arms over his chest. "I appreciate you being so understanding about this transition, Audrey," he said, even though I had not agreed to a single thing. "Derek here is a true brother. He recognizes a unicorn when he sees one. When we go public, we are going to make sure Derek gets a massive return on his investment. We are keeping it all in the family. That is how generational wealth is built. Generational wealth." The phrase echoed in my mind, and I had to physically bite the inside of my cheek to stop myself from laughing out loud. Devin was sitting at my table drinking the wine I paid for, eating the meal I cooked in the house I bought, lecturing me about generational wealth. He was manipulating Derek so flawlessly that Derek actually believed giving away a multi-million-dollar asset was a genius business move. "You really have it all figured out, do you not, Devin?" I said, quietly, keeping my voice dangerously calm. "A new headquarters, an open-concept workspace, Series A funding. It all sounds incredibly ambitious." Devin beamed, mistaking my icy composure for submission. "That is the tech mindset, Audrey. You have to pivot when the market demands it. Consider this your pivot. You will find a nice, sensible condo downtown closer to your office. It will be much better for your commute." He picked up the manila envelope containing the quitclaim deed and tapped it playfully against the table. "Derek did the right thing here. He stepped up for his family. You should respect that and just bow out gracefully." I simply nodded. I did not scream. I just watched them celebrate a victory they had not even truly won yet. Barbara, who had been dabbing her eyes with a lace napkin, suddenly reached across the table and grabbed Megan's hand. She let out a loud theatrical sob that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. "Oh, Derek," she cried, looking at her son as if he were a saint. "You have always had the biggest heart. You are my golden boy, always taking care of your little sister, always putting family first." Barbara was 60 years old and spent the last decade living off the monthly allowance I secretly provided to Derek to give to her. She valued appearances above all else, wearing knockoff designer jewelry while lecturing me on being a traditional wife. Now she felt emboldened to drop all her pretenses. Barbara let go of Megan's hand and turned her cold gaze toward me. Her fake tears instantly vanished, replaced by a calculating glare. "Do not look so sour, Audrey," she snapped, her voice dripping with venom. "This is exactly what needs to happen. You and Derek have been married for 5 years, and what do you have to show for it? Nothing. Not a single child. You are 33 years old and obsessed with your career. You have completely failed in your duties to this family." I felt a sharp sting in my chest. She knew exactly how much we had struggled with fertility issues before I realized Derek was the problem. He had refused to go to a doctor, blaming my demanding corporate job instead. Now Barbara was weaponizing that deeply personal pain against me in front of everyone. "A massive 5-bedroom villa is for raising a family." Barbara continued waving her hand dismissively around the room. "Megan and Devin are the future of this family. They are the ones who will give me grandchildren. They need the space and the security. What do you need it for? So you can sit alone in your home office looking at financial spreadsheets. It is selfish, Audrey. Pure selfishness." I took a slow, deliberate breath. So I said, my voice dangerously steady, "This was a group decision. You all sat down and decided how to divide my property behind my back." Barbara scoffed, leaning back in her chair with a look of absolute triumph. "Your property. Please, when you marry into a family, you share. And since you clearly cannot grasp the basic concept of sharing, I took the liberty of expediting the moving process." She took a delicate sip of her wine. "I hired a moving crew this morning while you were out getting the roast. They were very efficient. They took all of your designer clothes, those ridiculously expensive shoes you waste money on, and your office files, and packed them into cheap cardboard boxes. They are sitting in the damp basement right now. I figured you would want a head start on your 24-hour eviction notice." The sheer audacity of her words hung heavily in the air. This was not just Derek having a manic episode of sudden generosity. This was a highly orchestrated, premeditated conspiracy. My own mother-in-law had let complete strangers into my home to rummage through my personal belongings. They had violated my privacy, handling my expensive wardrobe and my confidential corporate work documents, tossing them into boxes like garbage. They had been planning this ruthless coup for weeks, waiting for the perfect Sunday dinner to spring the trap. Derek looked at his mother with a proud grin. "Mom handled the logistics," he said smoothly. "We wanted to make the transition as seamless as possible for Devin and Megan. You really should thank her, Audrey. She saved you a lot of heavy lifting." Devin chuckled, tapping his phone screen. "Yeah, we already have contractors coming tomorrow morning to measure the living room for the startup standing desks. So you need to be out of here by 9 o'clock, Audrey. We cannot have you in the way of the construction crew." They were vultures circling what they thought was a carcass, ready to pick my life apart piece by piece. Barbara looked at me, expecting me to break down. She wanted me to cry, to beg Derek for forgiveness, to plead to stay in the home I had paid for. But I refused to give them the satisfaction. I looked at the smug faces of my husband, my mother-in-law, my sister-in-law, and her husband. They were entirely convinced they had outsmarted a woman who dismantled fraudulent million-dollar corporations before breakfast. I took one last look at the crystal wine glass in my hand. I set it down gently on the custom oak table. The faint clink of the glass against the wood was the only sound in the room. I did not cry. I did not fall to my knees and beg my husband to reconsider. I did not scream at my mother-in-law or throw my plate at Devin. In my line of work, When a hostile corporate takeover is initiated, emotional outbursts only hand your opponent the leverage they desperately need. Instead, I stood up slowly. I smoothed the wrinkles from my silk dress and locked my eyes directly onto Derek. For a brief second, I saw a flicker of uncertainty behind his arrogant facade. He was expecting a hysterical wife. He was expecting a woman who would bargain and plead someone he could easily overpower and humiliate in front of his family to prove his dominance. But I was not that woman. I walked around the edge of the dining table, my heels clicking sharply against the imported hardwood floor, until I was standing just a few feet away from him. "Are you absolutely sure you want to play this hand, Derek?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying enough weight to slice through the tension in the room. Because once you put these cards on the table, there is no taking them back. You are making a decision that will alter the rest of your life. Derek scoffed, crossing his arms and puffing out his chest to make himself look bigger in front of his audience. "Do not try to psychoanalyze me, Audrey. It is over. You spent the last 5 years making me feel like a guest in my own marriage. You controlled the finances, you made all the decisions, and you constantly emasculated me with your massive paychecks. Well, I am taking back my power. Half of everything we acquired during this marriage belongs to me under California law. I am choosing to give my half of this house to my sister. The other half will be settled in divorce court. So stop acting like you hold all the leverage here. You have nothing." His complete ignorance of basic property law was staggering. He genuinely believed that just because we were legally married, he was automatically entitled to half of a property I had purchased entirely with a premarital trust fund. But I was not about to offer him free legal advice. Megan sneered from across the table. "Just leave, Audrey. You are making this awkward for everyone. We want to celebrate our anniversary in peace. Devin already called an Uber for you. It is waiting at the end of the driveway." Devin raised his glass in a mocking salute. "Do not worry about the boxes in the basement. I will have the movers haul them to a storage unit tomorrow. I will even pay the first month of rent for you. Consider it an act of charity from your new landlord." Barbara let out a sharp, nasty laugh. "Just make sure you leave the keys on the kitchen counter, Audrey. We are changing the locks tomorrow morning anyway, but we do not need you trying to sneak back in to steal anything." I did not respond to Barbara. I did not look at Megan or Devin. My focus remained entirely on Derek. He looked so incredibly proud of himself, so convinced that he had just pulled off the ultimate coup. He thought he had broken me. He thought he had won. I turned around and walked toward the grand entryway. I grabbed my designer purse from the console table and slipped my phone into my pocket. I did not bother walking down to the basement to check on the cheap cardboard boxes they had carelessly stuffed my belongings into. I did not need to. I knew perfectly well that I would be back before they even had a chance to move a single piece of my furniture. I opened the heavy mahogany front door. The cool night air of the Calabasas hills swept into the foyer, carrying the familiar scent of pine and eucalyptus. Before stepping out into the driveway, I paused. I turned my head slightly, looking back into the brightly lit dining room. They were already pouring more wine, laughing loudly, and celebrating their stolen victory. Derek was patting Devin on the back, while Barbara was happily pointing at the expensive silk drapes she planned to tear down. "Derek," I called out, my voice echoing slightly in the large foyer. He stopped laughing and looked at me, a smug smile still plastered across his face. I gave him one final chilling smile. "Enjoy your last night." I stepped out into the darkness and pulled the door shut behind me with a loud, decisive click. The game had officially begun. I walked down the illuminated driveway toward my car, the crisp California night air clearing the suffocating atmosphere of the dinner from my lungs. I climbed into my car, the soft leather seating, a stark contrast to the cold reality of what had just occurred. I drove in complete silence down to Los Angeles. Women in my position were supposed to be sobbing over the steering wheel, mourning the sudden death of their marriage. But my eyes were completely dry. I was not mourning. I was calculating. 20 minutes later, I handed my keys to the valet at the Ritz-Carlton. I walked through the grand lobby, my posture perfectly straight, and booked their best available executive suite. Once the bellhop dropped off my bag and closed the heavy mahogany door of my room, the silence returned. I took off my heels, placed them neatly by the closet, and walked straight to the desk, sitting in the corner of the suite. I did not run a hot bath. I did not order a glass of wine to soothe my nerves. I pulled my laptop out of my bag and opened it. In the corporate restructuring world, when a hostile takeover is attempted, the absolute first step you take is to cut off the opposing side's funding. You freeze their assets, sever their supply lines, and starve them of the resources they need to fight you. Derek and his family had just launched a hostile takeover of my life. And Derek's entire existence, his inflated ego, his generous brother act, was entirely funded by my capital. I logged into my primary wealth management portal and stared at the dashboard. It was time to face the financial reality I had spent 5 years politely ignoring to protect my husband's fragile masculinity. I bring home $400,000 a year. My consulting firm pays me handsomely to travel across the country and save failing enterprises from bankruptcy. Derek, on the other hand, makes $60,000 a year pushing mid-tier insurance policies. It is a perfectly respectable income for a single man living within his means. But Derek did not live within his means. Derek drove a leased luxury vehicle, wore an expensive watch, and took his family to high-end steakhouses. He loved playing the role of the affluent provider who spoiled his sister and subsidized his mother's lifestyle. He could afford none of it. I afforded it for him. When I realized the massive income disparity was making him insecure, I made the mistake of trying to fix it with my checkbook. I handed him 3 supplementary platinum credit cards and told him to treat them as shared funds. It was an illusion I maintained out of love. I clicked on the first account his primary platinum card used for daily expenses and dining. I watched the screen load his recent transactions. A $200 charge at a golf club yesterday. A $400 charge at a boutique where he had bought Megan an anniversary gift. My money buying their loyalty. I hovered my cursor over the security tab, clicked the drop-down menu, and selected the option to report the card as lost. Then I permanently disabled the authorized user. The account was instantly frozen. I moved to the second card. This was the travel and entertainment card, the one he used to book flights for Devin and Megan when they wanted to take weekend trips. I froze that one too. Finally, I opened the third account. This was the card he used to pay his mother's monthly bills, her groceries, and her little shopping sprees. It was the financial lifeline that kept Barbara fiercely loyal to him and deeply resentful of me. With one sharp click of my trackpad, I severed that lifeline completely. I sat back and watched the confirmation emails roll into my inbox. Card frozen. Account restricted. Access denied. In less than 10 minutes, I had systematically dismantled the financial foundation Derek had built his entire identity upon. He had practically no cash in his checking account, as he always spent his paycheck on custom suits and golf memberships. He relied on my platinum cards for everything. He was now effectively broke. I closed my laptop and finally allowed myself a small, genuine smile. Derek had kicked me out of my own house thinking he had won the war, but he had no idea that I had just shut off his oxygen supply. I walked over to the king-sized bed, pulled back the crisp sheets, and turned off the bedside lamp. I knew exactly what was going to happen when the sun came up, and I wanted to be fully rested for the show. I woke up the next morning at 7 o'clock sharp. The sunlight was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my hotel suite, casting a warm glow over the pristine white linens. For the first time in 5 years, I did not have to wake up and immediately manage Derek's chaotic schedule. I did not have to remind him to pick up his dry cleaning or listen to him complain about his mediocre job. I simply picked up the hotel phone, ordered a spinach and feta omelet with a pot of black coffee, and walked into the marble bathroom to take a long, luxurious shower. I felt lighter than I had in years. The heavy burden of subsidizing an ungrateful man's fragile ego had been lifted off my shoulders. By 8:30, I was sitting at the glass dining table in my suite wearing a plush white robe and reviewing a quarterly earnings report for one of my corporate clients. My phone had been completely silent all morning. I knew Derek's morning routine by heart. He would wake up late, act like a hero by offering to go pick up breakfast for everyone, and drive to the overpriced artisanal bakery down the street from our villa. He loved going there because the baristas knew him by name and treated him like a very important person entirely because he tipped them 20% using my platinum credit card. At exactly 8:45, my phone screen finally lit up. The caller ID displayed Derek's name. I let it ring 3 times, taking a slow sip of my hot coffee before calmly swiping the screen to answer. I did not say hello. I just pressed the phone to my ear and waited. Audrey. What the hell did you do? Derek screamed into the receiver. His voice was completely frantic, echoing slightly as if he was pacing outside on the concrete sidewalk. I am standing inside the bakery right now. Devin and Megan ordered 4 specialty lattes and a dozen artisanal pastries. The total was nearly $80. I handed the cashier my card, the one I always use, and the machine declined it. It beeped loudly in front of a massive line of people. The barista looked at me like I was some kind of criminal and told me the account was locked. I smiled, keeping my eyes locked on the financial spreadsheet on my laptop screen. Is there a problem, Derek? I asked, my voice smooth and perfectly composed. Yes, there is a massive problem, he yelled, his panic escalating rapidly. My mother is sitting at a table near the window watching me. Devin is standing right behind me, waiting for his iced matcha latte. I tried to use the backup travel card you gave me, and that one was declined too. Did you cancel my cards? Did you actually freeze my accounts out of pure spite just because I gave my sister the house? I leaned back in my chair and let out a soft, amused laugh. Your accounts, Derek. Let us clarify something right now. Those are my accounts. They are tied to my credit score paid by my corporate salary and issued under my primary authorization. You were simply an authorized user. And since you made it abundantly clear last night that our marriage is over and that you are the big, powerful man of the house, now, I figured you no longer needed your wife to fund your lavish lifestyle. You cannot do this to me right now, Derek hissed, dropping his voice to a frantic whisper. He was clearly trying to hide his intense humiliation from his family and the wealthy local customers standing in line behind him. Audrey turned the cards back on. Just for today. I will pay you back when the divorce is finalized. I cannot stand here and tell Devin that I cannot afford to buy them breakfast. He thinks I am an angel investor. You are embarrassing me in front of my family. You embarrassed yourself, Derek, I replied coldly, feeling absolutely zero pity for the man who had tried to leave me homeless. You wanted to play the role of the wealthy patriarch. You wanted to build generational wealth and fund tech startups. You literally kicked me out of my own home less than 12 hours ago to prove how generous you are. So be generous. Pull out your own debit card and pay for your own $15 coffee. Audrey, please. He begged, the arrogant tone from last night completely gone. I do not have any cash in my checking account until Friday. You know that. Then I suggest you ask your brilliant tech bro brother-in-law to cover the bill, I said softly. Enjoy your breakfast, Derek. I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red end call button. I tossed the phone onto the table and went back to eating my omelet. The first domino had officially fallen, and the crash was absolute music to my ears. I finished the last bite of my spinach and feta omelet, savoring the quiet peace of my hotel room. Down in the city, I knew Derek was scrambling, probably begging Devin to cover the cost of their overpriced pastries while trying to explain away his suddenly frozen funds. But my brief moment of amusement was over. It was time to go to war. And in my line of work, you do not go to war without your lead counsel. I picked up my phone again and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name Jonathan. Jonathan is 50 years old, a senior partner at one of the most ruthless law firms in Los Angeles. He specializes in high net worth divorces and complex real estate litigation. We had crossed paths professionally on several corporate restructuring cases, and I knew firsthand that he was an absolute shark in a courtroom. He did not possess a single ounce of empathy for opposing counsel, which made him exactly the man I needed today. I pressed call and he answered on the second ring. "Audrey, my favorite corporate assassin!" Jonathan greeted, his voice sharp and alert, despite the early hour. "To what do I owe the pleasure on a Monday morning? I hope you are bringing me a lucrative corporate dissolution." "Better," I replied, walking over to the floor-to-ceiling window and looking out at the sprawling Los Angeles skyline. "I am bringing you a highly entertaining divorce. Mine. I need you to draw up the paperwork immediately, and I need to execute a hostile eviction at my Calabasas property." Jonathan chuckled, the sound deep and gravelly. Derek finally did something incredibly stupid, I assume. "Tell me everything." I gave him a concise, emotionless summary of the Sunday dinner ambush. I detailed how Derek stood up, presented a manila envelope, and announced he was gifting the $2.4 million villa to his sister Megan and her husband Devin. I told Jonathan about the 24-hour eviction notice Derek had so graciously issued me, and how my mother-in-law had already packed my clothes into cheap cardboard boxes in the basement. When I finished, there was a brief silence on the other end of the line, followed by a sudden booming laugh. Jonathan laughed so hard he actually had to catch his breath. "Audrey, please tell me you are joking," he finally said. "Did that idiot actually hand you a quitclaim deed?" "He did." I confirmed, feeling a cold smile creep onto my face. "He told me that under California law, he was entitled to half of our marital assets, and he was choosing to give his half of the house to his sister. That is the most spectacular display of financial illiteracy I have heard all year," Jonathan stated, his tone shifting from amused to purely predatory. "Let us review the facts for the sake of my own sanity. You purchased that Calabasas villa entirely in cash, using the inheritance your late father left you, correct?" "Correct," I answered. "I bought it 2 years before I even met Derek." "And under California law," Jonathan continued, pacing around his office. I could hear his leather shoes squeaking against the hardwood floor. "Assets acquired prior to a marriage remain sole and separate property, provided they are not commingled with marital funds. Derek has never paid a single cent toward the property taxes, the maintenance, or the insurance. His paycheck barely covers his golf habit." "I paid for the golf habit too," I corrected him. "But I just froze all those cards this morning." "Brilliant," Jonathan said. "But here is the absolute best part, the ultimate kill shot. You did not just buy that house in your own name. We set up an irrevocable trust. The villa is entirely locked inside that trust. Derek's name has never been on the title. It has never been on the deed. He has zero legal claim to it, not even 1%. You cannot quitclaim an asset you do not own. It is the legal equivalent of me trying to sell the Brooklyn Bridge to a tourist." "I know," I said, leaning my forehead against the cool glass of the window. "Derek just assumed that because we said our vows and he lived there, he magically owned half of my net worth. Devin convinced him that giving the house away was a genius move to build generational wealth. Well, Devin is about to learn a very painful lesson about real estate law." Jonathan replied, his voice turning deadly serious. "But Audrey, this raises a massive red flag. A quitclaim deed has to be filed with the county clerk to be processed. If Derek actually submitted paperwork attempting to transfer a property he does not own, he did not just make a foolish mistake. We need to see exactly what he signed. Give me 20 minutes to pull the county records online. I have a feeling your husband just handed us something much worse than a divorce." I hung up the phone and walked over to the coffee maker in the suite. I poured myself another cup, watching the steam rise against the backdrop of the busy Los Angeles streets below. 20 minutes can feel like an absolute eternity when you are waiting for the final piece of a puzzle that will permanently destroy your marriage. I used the time efficiently. I brushed my teeth, applied a sharp, flawless layer of makeup, and put on a tailored navy blue power suit. If today was going to be a war, I was going to dress like a general. I packed my laptop into my leather briefcase and sat back down at the glass dining table, staring at my phone. Exactly 22 minutes later, the screen lit up with Jonathan's name. I answered immediately. He did not bother with a casual greeting this time. I could hear the aggressive clicking of his computer mouse in the background. Audrey, he said, his voice entirely stripped of the amusement he had shown earlier. It was replaced by the cold, surgical tone he only used when he was looking at a slam-dunk criminal case. I found the filing. I pulled the records directly from the county database. I am listening, I said, leaning forward and resting my elbows on the table. Jonathan took a deep breath. Derek submitted a quitclaim deed to the county recorder's office late Friday afternoon, just before the weekend cutoff. He filed it electronically using a third-party digital notary service. The document attempts to transfer the title of the Calabasas villa from the irrevocable trust completely into a newly formed limited liability company. I ran a quick search on the business registry for the state. The LLC was formed exactly 3 weeks ago, and the sole registered agent is your tech bro brother-in-law, Devin. My jaw tightened. They were not just trying to take the house so Megan could have a nice kitchen. Devin was actively trying to shield my $2.4 million asset under a corporate entity he controlled. But that is not even the worst part, Audrey, Jonathan continued, his voice dropping an octave. I am looking at the final page of this digital document right now. There is a verified electronic signature authorizing the complete transfer of the property. The system logged the IP address and the timestamp. It is your exact digital signature. The temperature in my hotel room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I stood completely still, my mind instantly racing back to Friday afternoon. I had been sitting in a glass-walled conference room in downtown Los Angeles for 9 consecutive hours, aggressively hammering out the details of a complex corporate merger for a client. I had not opened any personal emails. I certainly had not signed away my most valuable financial asset. Jonathan, I said, my voice turning to absolute ice. I did not sign that document. I did not authorize a digital notary. Derek forged my signature. I know you did not, Jonathan replied instantly, the ruthless satisfaction returning to his voice. And because I know you did not, your soon-to-be ex-husband just crossed the line from being a greedy, delusional idiot into becoming a documented federal criminal. Let me break this down for you so you understand the exact weapon he just handed us. By falsifying your signature on a legal property transfer document, Derek has committed felony forgery. That alone is enough to ruin his life. Jonathan paused to let the weight of the word felony sink in before continuing. But it gets so much worse for him. Because he used an online internet portal to transmit a fraudulent real estate deed utilizing servers that cross state lines, he has also committed wire fraud. Wire fraud is a federal offense, Audrey. It carries a massive prison sentence. And because the value of the stolen asset exceeds $2 million, this is not a misdemeanor or a minor infraction. This is a high-level white-collar felony. He did not just make a stupid mistake to impress his sister. He committed a major crime that carries mandatory minimum sentencing. I gripped the edge of the glass table. Derek's blind arrogance had finally caught up to him. He was so desperate to play the role of the generous, wealthy patriarch for Devin and Megan that he literally forged my name on a government document without doing a single second of legal research. He thought he was untouchable just because he was my husband. How did he even get my digital signature? I asked, my mind working furiously to put the pieces together. He lives with you, Audrey? Jonathan pointed out logically. He has access to your home office. He probably waited until you went to sleep, opened your personal laptop or your iPad, guessed your password, and approved the document request himself. It is incredibly stupid and easily traceable, but arrogant men usually are. What matters now is that we have the ultimate leverage. What is our next move? I asked, feeling a massive surge of pure, unadulterated adrenaline. "We let them dig the hole a little deeper," Jonathan said smoothly. "We need to gather more evidence of their intent to commit fraud. I am putting my private investigator on Devon right now." I agreed with Jonathan, ended the call, and closed my laptop. My adrenaline was pumping, but I knew I had to remain entirely patient. In the world of corporate litigation, you never interrupt your enemy while they are actively making a massive mistake. I decided to work from the hotel suite for the rest of the day, setting up a makeshift command center at the glass desk overlooking the city. I was just about to dive back into a quarterly earnings report when my cell phone buzzed aggressively against the tabletop. It was not Derek calling to beg for his credit cards this time. It was a text message from his sister Megan. I unlocked my phone and opened the message thread. A series of 4 high-resolution photos instantly loaded onto my screen. My heart did a slow, heavy thump in my chest as I registered exactly what I was looking at. It was my formal dining room. But it did not look like my elegant dining room anymore. Megan and Devon were standing right in the middle of the room holding heavy-duty metal paint scrapers. The expensive imported hardwood floor was completely covered in shredded strips of my custom hand-painted Italian silk wallpaper. I had commissioned that specific wallpaper directly from a boutique design studio in Milan 2 years ago. It cost me $18,000 and took 3 entire weeks for a specialist to meticulously install. In the photos, Megan was smiling brightly for the camera, wearing a pair of dirty denim overalls and holding up a massive torn piece of the delicate silk fabric like it was a hunting trophy. Devon was standing in the background, actively gouging the drywall with his metal scraper, completely ruining the smooth plaster underneath. Another text message popped up immediately after the photos. It read, "Good morning, Audrey. Just thought I would give you a little update on the renovations. We decided to get an early start on fixing your terrible taste in decor. This ugly wallpaper was making the room feel way too closed off and stuffy for a modern tech startup. Do not worry, we are going to paint it a nice, bright startup white. Hope you are enjoying your new apartment wherever it is." Before I could even process the sheer audacity of her words, a second text arrived. "Derek says we can rip out the custom kitchen island tomorrow. Devon needs the extra open space for a ping-pong table to encourage a relaxed corporate culture for his new software engineers. I cannot believe you lived in such a dark, depressing space for so long. It is finally going to have some good energy now that we own it." My fingers tightened around the edges of my phone. The entitlement was absolutely suffocating. Megan had lived in my house for less than 12 hours, and she was already aggressively destroying a masterpiece I had paid for with my own hard-earned money. Derek was clearly standing by watching them destroy my property, enabling their chaotic behavior because he was too much of a coward to stop them. He was so desperate for their validation that he was letting them dismantle my home piece by piece. A normal person would have immediately called the police to report vandalism. A desperate, heartbroken wife would have called her husband to scream and cry about the destruction of their shared sanctuary. But I was neither of those things. I took a deep, stabilizing breath and looked at the photos again. Not as a homeowner mourning her ruined walls, but as a forensic accountant documenting an active crime scene. Every single strip of silk wallpaper that hit the floor was another $1,000 in property damage. In the state of California, malicious destruction of property exceeding $400 is legally classified as felony vandalism. They were literally texting me photographic evidence of themselves committing another felony, completely unaware of the legal trap they were stepping into. I did not reply to her taunting messages. Engaging with an arrogant narcissist only gives them the emotional validation they desperately crave. Instead, I meticulously took screenshots of every single photo she sent me. I made sure the timestamps and her phone number were clearly visible in the margins. I screenshotted her text messages admitting to the destruction and mentioning Derek's approval. Then I uploaded the entire batch of images directly to a secure encrypted cloud folder I shared with my lawyer. I typed a quick email to Jonathan. Subject line: additional criminal charges. Body of the email: Jonathan, Please see the newly uploaded file. Megan and Devin are currently destroying the $18,000 custom Italian wallpaper in the dining room. Please add felony vandalism and willful destruction of private property to our growing list of charges. Let me know when the private investigator gets back to you regarding Devin. I hit send and set my phone face down on the glass desk. They thought they were erasing my presence from the house. They thought they were stamping their own authority onto the walls. In reality, they were just wrapping the legal noose tighter around their own necks. I opened my client spreadsheet completely unfazed and went back to work, too. I had a multi-million-dollar corporate merger to finalize, and I was not about to let my husband's delusional family disrupt my billable hours. It was just past noon when my laptop pinged with an urgent calendar invite from Jonathan. The subject line simply read to join the video conference immediately. I clicked the secure link, and Jonathan appeared on my screen. He did not look like a lawyer who was casually reviewing a divorce file. He looked like a predator who had just cornered his prey. "Audrey, open your web browser and go to Instagram right now," Jonathan instructed, his voice tight with anticipation. "Do not use your personal account. Use a burner or watch anonymously through the web viewer. Your brilliant tech bro brother-in-law is currently broadcasting his crimes in high definition to the entire internet." I quickly opened a new tab, navigated to the platform, and searched for Devin's public profile. Sure enough, there was a glowing red ring around his profile picture indicating he was streaming live. I clicked it and the video feed instantly loaded. Devin was standing in the grand foyer of my Calabasas villa. He was wearing a dark gray fleece vest over a crisp white dress shirt, completely leaning into the stereotypical Silicon Valley executive aesthetic. He was holding his phone high, grinning widely at the camera as the viewer count slowly ticked upward. "What is going on, guys?" Devin said to his audience, his voice echoing loudly off my marble floors. "I told you big things were coming this quarter, and I always deliver on my promises. Welcome to the official new headquarters of our logistics platform." I watched in absolute disbelief as Devin spun the camera around to show off the sweeping double staircase and the custom crystal chandelier hanging from the ceiling. That chandelier alone cost more than his entire annual income. Jonathan spoke through my computer speakers. "I am screen recording the entire broadcast on my end, Audrey. Make sure your volume is up. We need to capture every single word he says." Devin began walking through the hallway, aiming the camera into the formal dining room where he and Megan had just destroyed my silk wallpaper. "As you can see, we are already doing some aggressive demolition," Devin bragged, panning over the ruined walls. "We just finalized the acquisition of this $2.4 million property this morning. We are tearing down these old walls to build an open-concept collaborative workspace for our lead developers." I felt a sharp surge of anger, but I forced myself to remain completely analytical. He was not just bragging to his friends. He was speaking directly to people he considered investors. We secured this massive asset under our corporate LLC. Devin continued, his tone smooth and entirely convincing. "This property gives us serious leverage. It proves to our venture capital partners that we are not just playing around in a garage anymore. We hold prime real estate in one of the most exclusive zip codes in California. For those of you who got in on the seed round of funding, your equity just skyrocketed. And for those of you waiting to write a check, the valuation of our company just tripled. The time to invest is right now." Jonathan let out a sharp, victorious laugh over the video call. "Oh, this is beautiful," he said, his eyes practically gleaming. "He is actively soliciting financial investments by falsely claiming ownership of a multi-million-dollar asset he does not legally possess." "Is that securities fraud?" I asked, keeping my eyes glued to the screen as Devin walked into my custom kitchen and leaned casually against my marble island. "It is textbook securities fraud," Jonathan confirmed. "And because he is doing it over a live internet broadcast to solicit funds, it is another count of wire fraud. He is building a massive federal case against himself in real time. He is literally creating the exact promotional material the Securities and Exchange Commission will use to put him in federal prison." I watched Devin confidently tap the marble countertop. "We are taking this company to the moon, guys," Devin told his viewers, flashing a charismatic smile. "My brother-in-law Derek is actually our primary angel investor who helped broker this massive real estate deal. We keep the wealth in the family. Big moves only. Drop a fire emoji in the chat if you are ready to disrupt the market with us." I watched the little emojis float up the side of the screen. Devin was so completely absorbed in his own delusion that he had just publicly implicated Derek as a co-conspirator in his fraudulent corporate acquisition. He was dragging my husband down with him, wrapping a neat little bow around their collective criminal enterprise. "Got it," Jonathan announced, hitting a key on his keyboard. The broadcast ended a few seconds later, but the damage was permanently recorded. I have the entire video saved in 3 separate secure locations. Audrey, your husband and his family are not just stealing, they are running a highly documented financial scam using your house as the bait. They have absolutely no idea what is coming. Jonathan's face grew incredibly serious on my computer screen. The amusement from watching Devin's ridiculous live stream faded entirely. He leaned closer to his webcam, resting his chin on his steepled fingers. "I have more, Audrey. The private investigator I use is a former forensic accountant for the FBI. He does not just look for infidelity or hidden bank accounts. He looks for hidden paper trails. He just sent over his preliminary report on Devin. And honestly, it perfectly explains why they were in such an unbelievable rush to get you out of that house by this morning." I leaned forward, my corporate instincts immediately locking in on the promise of hard financial data. In my line of work, sudden aggressive asset grabs are never about establishing dominance. They are always about covering up a massive deficit. "Tell me," I said. "What did the investigator find?" Jonathan pulled up a document on his end, his eyes scanning the text. Devin loves to brag about his past business ventures to his internet followers, but he conveniently leaves out the part where his last logistics company was aggressively audited by the Internal Revenue Service. They found massive discrepancies in his payroll taxes and severe commingling of personal and business funds. The IRS slapped him with a massive penalty. Devin currently owes the federal government exactly $150,000 in back taxes. I stared at the screen, letting the numbers sink in. $150,000. The IRS does not play games with 6-figure tax debts. They do not send polite reminders. They issue levies, they garnish wages, they freeze bank accounts, and they seize physical assets. Devin had likely been dodging them for months, moving money through shell companies, but his runway had just completely vanished. "They are closing in on him," Jonathan continued. "A federal tax lien was formally drafted last week. If he does not pay that balance immediately, he is going to face severe criminal tax evasion charges. He is drowning, Audrey. That whole tech bro millionaire persona is completely fabricated to hide the fact that he is about to be indicted." My mind rapidly pieced the puzzle together. Devin and Megan did not want my Calabasas villa so they could build a collaborative workspace for software engineers. They did not care about vaulted ceilings, custom kitchens, or open-concept floor plans. They needed capital, and they needed it yesterday. "They are going to leverage the house," I said, the realization hitting me with absolute clarity. They manipulated Derek into forging that quitclaim deed so Devin could put the property under his LLC. Now that he claims he owns a $2.4 million asset free and clear, he is going to use it as collateral to secure a hard money loan. "Exactly," Jonathan confirmed, nodding sharply. "Traditional banks take weeks to underwrite a mortgage, and their compliance departments would flag the forged deed immediately. But a predatory hard money lender does not care about your credit score or your tax history. They only care about the equity in the collateral. They will hand Devin $300,000 in a matter of days at an exorbitant interest rate simply because the property is worth over $2 million. Devin will take the cash, wire it directly to the IRS to clear his name, and leave the toxic debt sitting on your property title." If I had actually listened to Derek and walked away to file for a standard divorce, it would have taken months to untangle the legal mess. By then, the LLC would inevitably default, and the lender would be foreclosing on my home. The sheer audacity of the scheme was breathtaking. Devin and Megan had orchestrated this entire plot from the beginning. Derek was the perfect mark. He was a man who worked a mediocre job but desperately wanted to sit at the billionaire's table. Devin and Megan probably spent weeks stroking his ego, telling him how powerful he was, convincing him that real men control their household assets. They weaponized his deepest insecurities against me. Derek was not the criminal mastermind. He was just the useful idiot they needed to bypass my security. He really gave up his marriage and committed felony forgery just so his brother-in-law could pay off a tax bill, I said, shaking my head. The stupidity is almost tragic. Tragic for him. Highly advantageous for us, Jonathan corrected smoothly. Because by attempting to secure a loan using a forged property deed, Devin is conspiring to commit bank fraud. It elevates the entire situation to a massive federal conspiracy. Hard money lenders move fast, but they still require a physical appraisal of the property. That is why they needed you out of the house within 24 hours. They cannot have an appraiser walk into a house where the legal owner is sitting at the kitchen table. They needed the house empty to finalize the fraud, I concluded, checking my watch. Derek's eviction deadline was approaching. Let them apply for the loan. Let them think they won. Because when we finally show up, I want the shock to be absolutely devastating. Jonathan agreed and ended the call to finalize the local police coordination. I closed my laptop and stood up to stretch my legs. The suite was quiet, a stark contrast to the criminal enterprise unfolding inside my home. I walked over to the mini fridge, poured a glass of sparkling water, and took a long sip. Suddenly, my phone buzzed. It was an email from Jonathan with an urgent flag. The subject line read, "Your mother-in-law is running a digital garage sale." I opened the email and found a link to a Facebook Marketplace profile. I clicked it, and my screen was instantly flooded with photographs of my living room. Barbara had not just packed my clothes into cheap cardboard boxes. She had systematically photographed every single piece of vintage designer furniture I owned and proudly listed them for sale online. There was my authentic, mid-century modern walnut credenza appraised at $12,000. She listed it for $300. Next was my custom curved velvet sofa commissioned for $8,000. Her asking price was $400. She even listed my imported Persian silk rug for a humiliating $200. Barbara was recklessly liquidating my high-value personal assets for pennies just to get fast cash. She only saw them as obstacles standing in the way of Devin's imaginary tech workspace. But Jonathan was always 3 steps ahead. The email explained that the moment he saw the listings, he deployed his lead paralegal, Daniel, to act as an interested buyer. Daniel was already on site wearing a highly discreet recording device hidden inside his jacket. Attached directly to the bottom of the email was a secure live audio link. I clicked the audio file. The stream buffered before the crisp sound of footsteps on my driveway filled the room. The heavy wooden front door swung open, and Barbara's overly cheerful voice echoed through the microphone. "Oh, you must be the young man from the internet," Barbara greeted warmly. "Come on in. The credenza and the sofa are right through here. Do not mind the mess in the dining area. My son and son-in-law are doing some light demolition today." Daniel played his part perfectly, sounding polite and appropriately naive. "Wow, this is a beautiful house," he said, his footsteps echoing softly on the marble floor. "These furniture pieces are absolutely stunning. Are you sure you want to part with them for such a low price? $300 for this credenza seems like a massive steal." Barbara let out a highly dismissive, arrogant laugh. "Oh, take it. We are practically giving it away because we need the space cleared out tonight. My son just gifted this estate to his sister for a tech startup office. We do not need this dusty furniture cluttering the place." Daniel paused, his voice taking on a tone of mild curiosity. "Did you buy it locally? I just want to make sure I know how to care for the wood properly." Barbara lowered her voice into a conspiratorial tone. "Honestly, I did not buy it. It belonged to my son's deadbeat ex-wife. She was an awful, horribly selfish, career-obsessed woman who never gave me any grandchildren. My son kicked her out last night. She left this junk behind, so it is ours now. Finders keepers. She is probably living in some cheap motel downtown by now. Just give me the cash and back your truck up to the doors. I paused the audio recording, a cold wave of absolute victory washing over me. Barbara had just confessed on tape to selling property that did not belong to her. In California, selling stolen goods valued over $950 is classified as grand theft. Because she was using a public internet platform to fence the stolen items, it added another serious layer of cybercrime to their growing list of federal offenses. First, Derek committed forgery. Then Megan and Devin committed vandalism and wire fraud. Now Barbara was eagerly throwing herself into the mix with grand theft. They were functioning like an organized crime syndicate run by absolute amateurs. I picked up my phone and sent a quick text to Jonathan. It simply said, "Tell Daniel to hand her the cash. We want the theft fully finalized before the police arrive." I set the phone face down on the glass desk and looked at my watch. The eviction deadline was closing in, and I was finally ready to go back home. The eviction deadline was closing in, and I was finally ready to go back home. But before I packed my laptop into my leather briefcase, there was one final piece of evidence I needed to secure for good. Jonathan had the digital trail of the forged signature, which was strong, but in a court of law, defense attorneys love to argue about hacked networks and stolen passwords. I did not want circumstantial evidence. I wanted an execution. I wanted undeniable, crystal-clear visual proof of my husband committing a federal crime. I opened a highly secure web address, entered my two-factor authentication code, and hit enter. The screen instantly populated with 8 separate high-definition live video feeds broadcasting directly from inside my Calabasas villa. Derek was incredibly vain, but remarkably oblivious to his surroundings. Last year, a family 3 doors down experienced a devastating home invasion. I asked Derek to upgrade our security system. He complained it was too expensive and told me I was being paranoid. So I handled it myself. I hired a private security firm specializing in discreet surveillance. They installed state-of-the-art microscopic 4K cameras seamlessly integrated into the crown-molding smoke detectors and bookshelf displays throughout the primary living spaces. Because the cameras were completely invisible, and Derek never paid the monitoring invoices, he forgot they existed. I clicked on the feed labeled Home Office. The room was empty. I navigated to the playback feature and selected last Friday. I knew the exact timestamp from the county recorder's digital log Jonathan sent me. I dragged the video scrubber to exactly 3:45 in the afternoon and pressed play. The pristine video loaded instantly. The audio was so crisp I could hear the central air conditioning humming in the background. Derek walked into my private office looking nervously over his shoulder like a teenager sneaking into a liquor cabinet. A few seconds later, Barbara followed him inside and quietly pushed the heavy mahogany door shut behind them. Derek sat down at my custom walnut desk and opened my personal iPad, which I had left behind, while rushing to my corporate meeting. I watched as he typed in the 4-digit passcode. It was his own birthday. I never bothered changing it because I never imagined my husband would use it to commit a felony against me. "I am telling you, Derek, this is the only way," Barbara said, leaning over his shoulder and pointing a manicured finger at the glowing screen. "Devin needs this property to secure the funding. If you file for divorce first, the courts will freeze all the assets for months. Your sister will lose out on millions. Audrey has been stealing your prime years. She owes you this house." Derek hesitated, his finger hovering over the screen. "But Mom, if she finds out I signed this quitclaim deed without her being here, she is going to absolutely lose her mind. This is technically her trust fund property." Barbara let out a sharp, dismissive scoff. Let her lose her mind. What is she going to do? By the time she realizes the title has been transferred to Devin, the hard money loan will already be secured. The LLC will hold the deed. She cannot undo a corporate real estate transaction on her own. You are her husband. You have marital rights. Just press the button, Derek. Be the man of this family for once. Stop letting that sterile career-obsessed woman control your destiny. I watched the exact moment my husband decided to destroy his life. The hesitation left his face replaced by that same unearned, arrogant smirk he had worn at the dinner table. He tapped the screen. The digital notary software flashed green, indicating the electronic signature was successfully captured, and the document was officially submitted to the county clerk. They did it! Barbara cheered softly, clapping her hands together. Derek let out a long breath, looking incredibly proud of himself. They had absolutely no idea they were performing their grand criminal conspiracy in front of a hidden high-definition audience. I stopped the playback right there. My hands were perfectly steady as I downloaded the entire 10-minute clip in its highest resolution format. I attached the massive video file to a secure message and sent it directly to Jonathan. The subject line simply read "The Smoking Gun." There was no more investigating to do. I had the digital footprint, the financial records, the recorded confessions, and the undeniable 4K video evidence of multiple federal felonies. I closed my laptop, slid it into my briefcase, grabbed my car keys, and walked out of the hotel suite. It was finally time to clean house once and for all. I took the elevator down to the grand lobby, handed my ticket to the valet, and waited patiently for my luxury sedan. The Los Angeles afternoon sun was bright and unforgiving, reflecting sharply off the glass skyscrapers as I pulled out onto the busy streets. The drive back to Calabasas usually took about 45 minutes, depending on the unpredictable California traffic. I turned off the radio, preferring the absolute silence of the car cabin. I wanted to keep my mind perfectly sharp and my emotions entirely detached. I was not a heartbroken, scorned wife returning to her home to beg her husband for a second chance. I was a corporate executioner returning to liquidate a highly toxic asset. I was about halfway up the freeway, navigating through the heavy afternoon congestion when the Bluetooth system in my dashboard chimed loudly. Jonathan's name flashed across the digital display screen. I tapped a button on my steering wheel to answer the call. "I thought we had everything we needed to ruin them, Jonathan," I said, keeping my eyes focused on the brake lights of the cars ahead of me. "I am about 20 minutes away from the property boundaries right now." "We do have everything," Audrey, Jonathan replied, his voice practically vibrating with professional excitement. "But your brilliant tech bro brother-in-law just decided to hand us the absolute holy grail of federal indictments. Pull into the slow lane and listen to me very carefully. I just received an automated title monitoring alert from the county clerk's office. A third-party financial institution just placed a temporary lien inquiry on your Calabasas villa." I merged into the right lane, my grip tightening slightly on the smooth leather of the steering wheel. "A lien inquiry," I repeated, my analytical mind immediately dissecting the information. "They are moving incredibly fast. Who is the lender?" "It is a notorious hard-money lending firm based out of Nevada." Jonathan explained, the rapid clicking of his keyboard audible in the background. "They specialize in high-risk, high-interest bridge loans for commercial real estate developers who cannot get approved by traditional heavily regulated banks." Devin and Megan officially submitted a loan application exactly 1 hour ago. They are requesting a rapid cash disbursement of exactly $300,000. And they use the freshly forged quitclaim deed as their primary collateral to secure the funding. "It is exactly the amount he needs to cover his IRS tax debt and the massive late penalty fees," I said, shaking my head at the absolute audacity of their financial plan. "He actually thinks he can pull equity out of my house to pay off his federal tax lien before the government freezes his accounts." "He thinks he can," Jonathan corrected sharply. But what he actually did was elevate this entire situation from a state-level forgery case to a massive federal crime. Audrey applying for a financial loan using a fraudulent property deed is textbook federal mortgage fraud. The federal government does not mess around with lending fraud under any circumstances, especially not after the housing market crash. This is a severe escalation. They're not just looking at a slap on the wrist or a few months of probation anymore. Jonathan continued, clearly relishing the legal destruction he was about to unleash upon my husband's family. Mortgage fraud carries severe mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines. When the FBI and the federal banking regulators get involved, and they absolutely will, because the lender operates across state lines, Devin and Megan are looking at a maximum of 30 years in federal prison. And Derek is going right down with them as a primary co-conspirator, because his forged signature on that quitclaim deed is the foundation of the entire fraudulent loan application. I took a deep breath, letting the incredible magnitude of Jonathan's words settle over me. My husband had traded his freedom, his career, and his entire future just to appease his arrogant mother and his greedy sister. They had dug their own graves with staggering efficiency, and now they were eagerly jumping inside. Are the local authorities still on schedule? I asked, my voice completely devoid of any lingering sympathy. Yes, Jonathan confirmed immediately. I forwarded the loan inquiry alert directly to the district attorney and the local police precinct. We have officers standing by in your neighborhood right now. Because the dollar amount involved in the fraud is so incredibly high, they are taking this extremely seriously. I am pulling into your subdivision right now. I will wait for you at the end of your street. I will be there in exactly 10 minutes, I said, pressing my foot down harder on the accelerator. Let us go introduce my husband to his new reality. I ended the call. The 24-hour eviction notice Derek had so proudly issued to me at the dinner table was officially up. It was time for the real owner of the house to return. I kept my foot pressed steadily on the accelerator, the engine of my sedan humming, as I navigated the winding roads leading up to my exclusive gated community. While I drove in complete silence, my mind meticulously reviewed the logistical masterpiece Jonathan was orchestrating behind the scenes. In the high-stakes world of corporate litigation, flawless execution is absolutely everything. You overwhelm your opponents with insurmountable legal force before they even realize they are under attack. And Jonathan was currently mobilizing an entire army just for me. 10 minutes prior to my arrival, Jonathan had bypassed standard police dispatch entirely. When dealing with a complex financial crime involving a $2.4 million asset, a forged title deed, and a fraudulent federal loan application, you do not call the non-emergency line. Jonathan went directly to the district attorney's office. He had a professional relationship with the lead prosecutor of the white-collar crime division. Once Jonathan forwarded the secure file containing the forged electronic signature, the recorded audio of Barbara admitting to grand theft, and the security footage, the prosecutor did not hesitate. Because the total dollar amount of the attempted fraud vastly exceeded the state threshold, this was no longer a simple domestic dispute. It was automatically classified as a high-level aggravated felony. The district attorney immediately authorized an arrest mandate and coordinated directly with the commander of the local Calabasas police precinct. They recognized that Devin and Megan were actively attempting to secure federal funds through an illegal mortgage application, making them a significant flight risk the moment they realized the walls were closing in. The police commander agreed to deploy 2 patrol units to assist with the intervention. But Jonathan negotiated a very specific timeline for their arrival. He insisted that the authorities wait at the perimeter of my subdivision and only approach the property at the exact moment my 24-hour eviction deadline expired. He wanted Derek to feel the absolute peak of his false triumph right before we shattered his reality into a million unrecoverable pieces. I turned the steering wheel, my tires gliding smoothly onto the familiar street of my neighborhood. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawns. A few blocks away from my property, I spotted them. A sleek black town car was parked quietly near a fire hydrant, and idling directly behind it were 2 marked police cruisers. I pulled my sedan over, put the car in park, and stepped out into the warm air. Jonathan stepped out of his town car, wearing a sharply tailored charcoal gray suit, looking every bit the ruthless legal predator I paid him to be. He walked toward me with a confident stride, holding a thick leather folder tucked under his arm. Two police officers stepped out of the lead cruiser, their expressions serious and entirely professional. They were briefed and ready to execute the mandate without any hesitation. "Are we ready to do this?" Jonathan asked, a shark-like grin spreading across his face. "The district attorney has given the green light. The officers have reviewed the footage of your husband forging the document. They have the audio of your mother-in-law attempting to fence your stolen furniture. And they have the digital trail of Devon's active mortgage fraud application. They are here to make felony arrests." I looked at my watch. The digital display blinked perfectly to the exact minute Derek had told me to be out of the house. I could feel the pure adrenaline coursing through my veins, but my heart rate remained completely steady. I smoothed the lapels of my navy blue power suit and looked toward the end of the street where my beautiful Calabasas villa stood. I could faintly hear the obnoxious sound of bass-heavy music thumping from my front yard. They were throwing a party. "They are celebrating," I said, my voice completely cold and devoid of any mercy. "They think they own the estate and the money is already on the way." "Then let us go crash the party right now," Jonathan replied, gesturing for the officers to return to their vehicles. I got back into my luxury sedan. The two police cruisers pulled out into the street, their overhead lights turned off to maintain the element of total surprise. I followed closely behind their bumpers, my hands gripping the smooth leather of the steering wheel. Derek desperately wanted to play the grand role of the powerful patriarch who controlled all the family wealth and dictated my entire future. He was about to officially learn that true power comes from knowing exactly how to use the law to crush thieves. We turned the final corner, and my house finally came into full view for the grand finale. We turned the final corner, and my house finally came into full view for the grand finale. I tapped my brakes and pulled my luxury sedan to a complete stop against the curb, just outside the massive iron gates of my property. Jonathan pulled his town car up right behind me, and the two police cruisers anchored the rear of our convoy. I shifted my car into park and killed the engine. The 24 hours Derek had given me to vacate my own life had officially expired. I looked down at the silver face of my watch. It was exactly 6 o'clock in the evening. This was the precise moment yesterday when Derek had arrogantly tapped his fork against his crystal wine glass to command the attention of his family. This was the exact minute he had handed me that fraudulent manila envelope and told me to pack my bags. I had spent the last 24 hours systematically destroying his financial lifelines, uncovering his federal crimes, and building an insurmountable case against his entire family. Now the deadline was up, and it was time to collect my debts. I unbuckled my seatbelt and stepped out of my sedan. The warm California breeze caught the edge of my tailored navy blue power suit. Earlier this morning at the hotel, I had chosen this specific outfit with meticulous intention. In the corporate restructuring world, what you wear to a hostile negotiation is your armor. The sharp lines of the blazer, the crisp white silk blouse underneath, and the perfectly pressed trousers were designed to project absolute authority. I did not look like a heartbroken, discarded wife crawling back to beg for scraps of affection. I looked like an apex predator stepping into the boardroom to liquidate a bankrupt company. I felt completely devoid of fear. I felt absolutely no sadness for the man I had married. Any lingering affection I might have held for Derek had been entirely erased the moment I watched that high-definition security footage of him eagerly forging my signature. He had made his choice prioritizing his greedy mother and his manipulative sister over his vows to me. He had traded our marriage for the illusion of power, and now I was going to strip that power away from him permanently. Jonathan stepped out of his town car and walked over to me. He adjusted his silk tie, his eyes fixed on the heavy iron gates of my estate. The two police officers approached us, their hands resting naturally near their utility belts. Jonathan quickly outlined the rules of engagement for the authorities. He reminded them that I was the sole legal owner of the property and that the individuals inside were currently trespassing, actively destroying private property, and wanted for questioning regarding multiple federal financial crimes. "Are you completely ready for this, Audrey?" Jonathan asked, turning to face me. His voice was low and steady, carrying the weight of the moment. "Once we drive through those gates, the hammer drops. There is no backing out, no negotiating, and absolutely no mercy for anyone on that lawn." "I do not do mercy, Jonathan," I replied, keeping my cold gaze locked on the sprawling villa in the distance. "I only deal in consequences." I decided to leave my sedan parked out on the public street. I wanted to make a unified, overwhelming entrance that would completely paralyze them. I walked over and slid into the passenger seat of Jonathan's sleek black town car. Jonathan got behind the wheel, and I watched in the side mirror as the two police officers returned to their cruisers. They turned on their engines, their vehicles humming with low, menacing power. We were a highly tactical strike team, perfectly synchronized and heavily armed with undeniable legal evidence. Jonathan pressed a button on his sun visor, transmitting the digital access code to my front gates. The heavy iron doors slowly swung open, granting us full access to the property. He eased his foot off the brake, and the town car began rolling slowly up the long, manicured driveway. The two police cruisers followed in a tight, intimidating formation directly behind us. As we approached the main courtyard, the obnoxious sounds of the barbecue party grew overwhelmingly loud. I could hear the heavy bass of a hip-hop track rattling the custom windows of my house. I saw Devon's cheap leased car parked haphazardly on my pristine front lawn, showing an absolute disregard for my landscaping. I could hear loud, triumphant laughter echoing across the yard. They were completely oblivious to the legal hurricane that was currently rolling up their driveway. They genuinely believed they were untouchable, secure in their stolen castle, eagerly waiting for a predatory lender to wire them hundreds of thousands of dollars. I looked at the digital clock glowing on Jonathan's dashboard. It was 1 minute past the deadline. The grace period was officially over. I reached down and picked up my leather briefcase, resting it firmly on my lap. Inside were the trust documents, the printed screenshots of the vandalism, and the flash drive containing the forged signature video. It was the complete blueprint of their total destruction. The climax of this entire ordeal was finally set into motion, and I was absolutely ready to deliver the final crushing blow. The black town car glided to a smooth halt at the top of the circular driveway, positioning itself right in the center of their obnoxious outdoor celebration. The two police cruisers parked at sharp angles behind us, effectively blocking the main exit and cutting off any potential escape route. Through the tinted windows, I took a moment to observe the absolute circus unfolding on my front lawn. Devon had wheeled a massive industrial-sized charcoal grill right onto the manicured grass, and thick plumes of gray smoke were billowing up toward the second-story windows of my villa. The smell of burning meat mixed violently with the expensive jasmine bushes I had meticulously planted near the entryway. They were not just having a casual family dinner, they were throwing a full-blown victory party. A portable speaker was set up on the hood of Devon's leased car, blasting a heavy rap track at maximum volume. Empty champagne bottles were already scattered carelessly across the stone steps leading up to the front door. Megan was lounging on one of my imported teak patio chairs, wearing oversized sunglasses and holding a crystal flute, looking entirely too pleased with herself. Barbara was standing near the front door, animatedly talking on her cell phone and gesturing widely, undoubtedly bragging to one of her equally toxic friends about how she had successfully secured a multi-million-dollar estate for her golden children. And then there was Derek. My soon-to-be ex-husband was standing by the grill wearing a ridiculous floral button-down shirt and a pair of khaki shorts, holding a pair of stainless steel tongs like a scepter. He was laughing loudly at something Devon had just said, completely oblivious to the reality of his situation. He looked so incredibly comfortable, so perfectly at ease in the stolen life he thought he had successfully commandeered from me. Jonathan killed the engine of the town car. The sudden silence from our vehicle seemed to finally catch Derek's attention. He turned his head, his eyes squinting against the late afternoon sun, trying to peer through the heavily tinted glass of our windshield. When he saw the unmistakable black and white police cruisers parked directly behind us, a brief flash of confusion crossed his face. But true to his arrogant, incredibly dense nature, his confusion quickly morphed into a smug, self-satisfied smirk. He probably thought I had called the police to file a petty civil complaint. Or worse, that he could use the officers to enforce his 24-hour eviction notice and have me physically dragged off the property. I pushed open the heavy door of the town car and stepped out onto the cobblestone driveway. My heels clicked sharply against the pavement. Jonathan stepped out from the driver's side simultaneously, his leather briefcase gripped firmly in his right hand. As soon as I was fully visible, the music abruptly cut off. Devin had reached over and yanked the auxiliary cord from the speaker. The sudden silence that fell over the front yard was deafening, broken only by the crackle of the charcoal grill. Barbara lowered her cell phone, her mouth dropping open slightly as she took in my tailored navy blue power suit and the uncompromising expression on my face. Megan sat up straight in her lounge chair, her grip tightening on her champagne flute. But Derek did not shrink back. He puffed out his chest completely, misreading the tactical advantage I held. He tossed his tongs onto the side table of the grill, grabbed a half-empty bottle of beer, and swaggered down the stone pathway toward me. He stopped about 10 feet away, looking me up and down with an expression of pure, unadulterated contempt. He glanced at the two police officers who were now stepping out of their cruisers and closing in behind me. "Well, well, well," Derek called out, his voice echoing loudly across the silent driveway. "I told you to be gone by 6 o'clock, Audrey. You are technically trespassing right now." He took a slow sip of his beer, his eyes flashing with malicious delight. "Did you come back to beg, or just to get the rest of your trash?" I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact. I just stared at him, letting his incredibly foolish words hang in the air for everyone to hear. He was so desperate to look powerful in front of his mother and sister that he was completely ignoring the fact that I had not arrived alone. I had brought a high-powered attorney and armed law enforcement officers. "I did not come back for my trash, Derek," I said, my voice eerily calm and carrying perfectly across the distance between us. "I came back to take out the garbage." Derek let out a harsh, mocking laugh, completely unfazed by my response. He turned back to look at Devin and Megan, gesturing toward me, as if I were a comedian performing a pathetic routine. He still thought this was a domestic dispute over a house he magically owned. He had absolutely no idea the trap had already sprung. Before Derek could take another step toward me, Devin suddenly pushed past him. Devin was significantly taller than Derek, and he always used his physical size to command rooms and intimidate investors who questioned his business plans. He marched down the driveway, his expensive designer sneakers crushing the delicate petals of the jasmine bushes I had meticulously planted along the stone border. He stopped just inches away from me, invading my personal space in a deliberate attempt to make me step backward. But I planted my feet firmly on the cobblestone and stared directly up into his eyes, refusing to yield a single inch of ground. I could smell the expensive cologne he was wearing, no doubt purchased with the money he should have been sending to the Internal Revenue Service. "You need to leave right now," Audrey Devin commanded, his voice deep and laced with aggressive authority. "Derek was nice enough to give you a 24-hour notice, but that time has officially expired. This is no longer your home. You do not get to show up here with a lawyer and try to scare us with empty threats. I am the chief executive officer of a rapidly expanding technology firm, and this property is now my corporate headquarters. If you do not turn around and get back into your little sedan, things are going to get very ugly for you." I did not even blink. I simply tilted my head and looked past his broad shoulders. The two police officers had finished securing the perimeter and were now walking calmly up the driveway, their hands resting easily on their dark uniforms. Devin noticed my gaze shifting and finally turned his head to acknowledge the law enforcement presence approaching from behind us. Any normal person with a massive federal tax debt and a history of failed business ventures would have instantly panicked at the sight of armed police officers walking onto their property. But Devin was so completely consumed by his own fabricated reality that he actually smiled. He genuinely believed the police were there to serve his interests. He thought the legal system was designed to protect his newly stolen wealth. "Officers, perfect timing!" Devin called out, raising his hand and waving them over as if he had personally called them to resolve a minor neighborhood dispute. "I am the legal owner of this estate. This woman is my brother-in-law's estranged wife. She is currently trespassing on private property and refusing to vacate the premises after being served a formal eviction notice. I want her removed immediately." To prove his point, Devin reached into the back pocket of his tailored shorts and pulled out a folded stack of papers. It was the articles of organization for his newly formed limited liability company, the exact same corporate entity he was trying to use to secure the fraudulent hard money loan. He aggressively unfolded the documents and shoved them directly toward the chest of the lead police officer. "Look right here," Devin insisted, tapping his finger forcefully against the printed ink. "This is a legally binding corporate document. The quitclaim deed was filed with the county yesterday afternoon. The title was officially transferred to my company. I have the exclusive legal right to dictate who is allowed on this property, and I am formally requesting that you place this woman in handcuffs and escort her off my driveway. She is actively harassing my family." The lead officer, a tall man with graying hair at his temples, did not take the papers. He did not even look down at them. He just stared at Devin with an expression of profound amusement, the kind of look a veteran detective gives to a reckless criminal who just handed over the murder weapon. The second officer stood quietly a few feet away, shifting his weight slightly and exchanging a knowing glance with his partner. They had already been fully briefed by the district attorney. They had already seen the high-definition video of the forgery taking place in my home office. They knew exactly who Devin was, and they knew the piece of paper in his hand was nothing more than a signed confession to a federal crime. "Sir, I suggest you lower your voice and step back." The lead officer said, his tone entirely calm, but carrying an undeniable edge of absolute authority. He did not reach for his handcuffs. He did not ask for my identification or question my presence. Instead, he simply crossed his arms over his chest and looked directly at Devin. "We are not here to arrest this woman for trespassing." Devin looked completely baffled. His charismatic tech bro facade slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing the panicked, heavily indebted amateur hiding underneath. "What do you mean you are not going to arrest her? I just showed you the corporate paperwork. I own this house." The officer let out a short, humorless chuckle and shook his head. He took a deliberate step to the side, clearing the visual path between Devin and Jonathan. "You do not own anything, son," the officer replied smoothly. He gestured toward my attorney, who was standing quietly beside me holding his heavy leather briefcase. "We are going to let Mr. Jonathan explain the exact reality of your current situation, and I highly recommend you listen very carefully to every single word he says, because your next move is going to determine how the rest of your evening unfolds." Devin slowly lowered the crumpled corporate paperwork, his eyes darting nervously between the armed officers and Jonathan. The aggressive, domineering posture he had just used to try and intimidate me vanished entirely. Derek, who had been watching the entire exchange from a few feet away, suddenly looked incredibly pale. The arrogant smirk was finally wiped completely off his face. The obnoxious barbecue music was gone. The fake victory celebration was over. The stage was perfectly set for Jonathan to open his briefcase and deliver the legal execution. Jonathan did not even acknowledge Devin's frustrated silence. Instead, he stepped forward, walking right past the towering tech executive, as if he were completely invisible. Jonathan unlatched his heavy leather briefcase and rested it flat against the hood of Devin's leased car. The metallic click of the latch's opening sounded incredibly loud in the quiet courtyard. Several of my wealthy Calabasas neighbors, drawn outside by the sudden arrival of law enforcement and the abrupt end of the loud hip-hop music, were now standing at the edges of their manicured lawns. They were watching the entire spectacle unfold, with intense curiosity, eager to see how the neighborhood disturbance would be resolved. Jonathan reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents bound in a dark blue cover. He turned away from Devon and walked directly toward my husband. Derek instinctively took a half step backward, his eyes darting toward the two police officers who were watching his every move. Jonathan stopped right in front of Derek and practically shoved the thick stack of papers into his chest. Derek had no choice but to grab them, his hands shaking slightly as he looked down at the dense legal text. "Let us clear up this little real estate delusion right now," Jonathan announced. His voice was incredibly loud, perfectly projected, so that every single neighbor, police officer, and family member on the lawn could hear him clearly. "You are holding the original formation documents for the irrevocable trust established by my client over 7 years ago. This legal entity is the sole and exclusive owner of this property." Derek stared blindly at the front page, his eyes scanning the complex legal jargon but comprehending absolutely none of it. "What is this?" he mumbled, his voice completely stripped of its former bravado. "I filed the quitclaim deed yesterday. The county accepted it. The house belongs to Devon now." Jonathan let out a sharp, booming laugh that echoed across the driveway. "The county automated system accepted a digital submission, Derek. That does not mean the document holds any legal weight whatsoever. You cannot transfer ownership of an asset that you do not legally possess, and you, Derek, do not own a single brick of this estate." Derek's head snapped up, his face flushing a deep, angry red. "That is a lie," he shouted, his voice cracking slightly as the reality of his situation began to set in. "We are married. We live in California. It is a community property state. I am legally entitled to half of everything she has." Jonathan shook his head slowly, looking at Derek with a mixture of professional disgust and profound pity. "That is the fundamental problem with getting your legal advice from internet forums and a failed tech entrepreneur," Jonathan replied, gesturing casually toward Devon. "California community property laws only apply to assets acquired during the marriage with marital funds. Audrey purchased this $2.4 million villa entirely in cash using a premarital inheritance. Before she even walked down the aisle with you, she placed this entire estate inside a highly secure, irrevocable trust." Jonathan took a step closer to Derek, lowering his voice just enough to force everyone to lean in to hear the final crushing truth. "Your name has never been on the title, Derek. You were never on the deed. You were nothing more than an authorized guest living in a property owned by a corporate trust. Therefore, the quitclaim deed you so proudly signed and filed with the county clerk on Friday afternoon is completely legally void. It is a worthless piece of paper. You transferred absolutely nothing to your brother-in-law." I watched as the absolute reality of Jonathan's words finally crashed into Derek's brain. The arrogant smirk that had been plastered on his face for the last 24 hours instantly vanished. It was replaced by a look of sheer unadulterated panic. His hands began to tremble so violently that the thick stack of trust documents actually shook in his grip. He opened and closed his mouth repeatedly, like a fish gasping for air. The comfortable, luxurious life he had enjoyed for the last 5 years, the free housing, the paid vacations, the platinum credit cards, was entirely gone. And he had thrown it all away for a fake tech startup and a sister who only used him to get what she wanted. He finally realized that his grand master plan, the move that was supposed to make him the powerful patriarch of his family, was nothing more than a spectacular legal failure. But Jonathan was not finished. He turned to face Devon, who was now standing frozen near his leased car. "And because Derek transferred absolutely nothing to your fake limited liability company?" Jonathan continued, pointing a sharp finger directly at Devon. "That means the commercial loan application you submitted to a Nevada lender exactly 2 hours ago using this property as collateral is entirely fraudulent. You tried to borrow $300,000 against a house you do not own." Devon stood completely paralyzed. his mouth hanging slightly open as Jonathan's words hit him like a physical blow. But my focus immediately shifted back to my husband. The thick legal packet slipped from Derek's trembling hands, the heavy papers scattering carelessly across the pristine cobblestone driveway. He looked down at the documents, then slowly raised his head to look at me. His entire body was shaking violently. The alpha male persona he had tried so desperately to project just a few minutes earlier had completely evaporated. It left behind nothing but a terrified, highly incompetent man, finally realizing his entire life was over. He took an unsteady step toward me, completely ignoring Jonathan and the two armed police officers standing just feet away. His eyes were wide with a desperate, almost childlike confusion. The sheer arrogance was completely gone, replaced by a pathetic plea for understanding. "Audrey," he whispered, his voice cracking horribly. "Isn't this house mine? We are married." I stared at him for a long, silent second. And then I laughed. I did not just chuckle or politely smile to save his pride. I threw my head back and let out a loud, genuine laugh that echoed off the brick exterior of my $2.4 million villa. My laughter cut through the tense silence of the courtyard, like a knife completely shattering whatever remaining dignity Derek thought he possessed. Barbara gasped loudly, clutching her chest in horror, while Megan shrank back into her teak lounge chair, trying to make herself as invisible as possible. "You really are spectacular, Derek," I said, my voice dripping with absolute contempt as my laughter finally subsided. I stepped closer to him, entirely unfazed by his trembling frame. "You decided to execute a hostile takeover of my life. You threw me out of my own home, humiliated me in front of your family, and attempted to steal a multi-million-dollar asset to fund a fake tech company. And yet, despite orchestrating this grand criminal conspiracy, you did not even bother to perform a single basic Google search before committing a federal felony." Derek swallowed hard, a bead of sweat rolling down his pale temple. "I did not know," he stammered, his eyes darting wildly. "Devin said that because we are in California, everything is split 50-50. I took another deliberate step toward him, forcing him to look me directly in the eyes. "Let me explain exactly how profoundly stupid you both are. California is indeed a community property state. That means any wealth we build together during our marriage is split equally. But the key word there is together. I bought this house long before I ever met you. I paid for it in cash. It is a strictly premarital asset. It never belonged to the marriage, and it certainly never belonged to you. You did not contribute a single dollar to the down payment, the property taxes, or the maintenance. And because I know exactly how greedy, entitled people operate, I secured the property inside an irrevocable trust." I continued, my voice cold and merciless. "A trust is a separate legal entity. It is an impenetrable financial fortress that protects my wealth from incompetent people exactly like you. Did you honestly believe that just putting a cheap ring on my finger magically entitled you to my inheritance? Did you think signing a marriage certificate was a winning lottery ticket that gave you the right to hand my property over to your sister?" Derek stood completely frozen. He had spent his entire life being coddled by his mother, being told he was incredibly special, being convinced that he deserved the world simply because he existed as her golden child. He genuinely believed that his status as my husband overrode decades of established state and federal property law. He thought his sheer audacity would be enough to break me into submission. "You wanted to be the big man, Derek," I told him, gesturing to the lavish barbecue setup and the cheap champagne bottles littering my front steps. "You wanted to impress Devin. You wanted to play the wealthy angel investor generously funding a tech startup. But you are not an investor. You are a middle manager who makes $60,000 a year and uses my supplementary credit cards to buy overpriced coffee for your mother. And instead of being grateful for the luxury life I freely provided for you, you tried to rob me blind using a fake digital signature." The devastating reality of my words hung heavily in the California air. The wealthy neighbors watching from the street were completely silent, fully absorbing the epic public humiliation of the man who had tried to steal my estate. The two police officers shifted their weight, their hands moving closer to the handcuffs resting on their utility belts. Derek had absolutely no defense left. He had no legal argument, no financial leverage, and nowhere left to run. He had backed himself right into a corner, and it was time to lock the cage. I turned away from Derek's pale, trembling face and looked at Jonathan. He gave me a sharp, approving nod. I reached down into my leather briefcase and pulled out my tablet. The sleek device felt heavy in my hands, a digital execution block loaded with the final piece of undeniable evidence. I tapped the screen to wake it up, my fingers moving with practiced precision as I navigated to the secure video file I had downloaded back at the hotel suite. "Derek," I said, my voice projecting clearly over the silent courtyard. "You always complained that I was too paranoid when I hired that private security firm last year. You said spending money on discreet surveillance for our home was a massive waste of resources. But as a financial consultant, I always believe in protecting my investments. And it turns out the biggest threat to my property was not a random burglar off the street. It was the man sleeping in my bed." I turned the tablet around so the large high-definition screen was facing Derek, his family, and the two police officers standing nearby. I made sure the volume was turned all the way up to maximum capacity. Then, I pressed play. The crystal-clear 4K video filled the screen. Because the cameras were hidden in the crown, molding the angle provided a perfect, unobstructed view of my entire home office. The audio blasted through the tablet speakers, cutting through the warm afternoon air with absolute clarity. Everyone in the driveway watched as the digital version of Derek sneaked into my office looking nervously over his shoulder before sitting down at my custom walnut desk. A collective gasp rippled through the small crowd of wealthy neighbors watching from the sidewalk as the digital version of Barbara followed him inside and pushed the heavy mahogany door shut. Then, Barbara's voice echoed loudly from the tablet, her harsh tone captured perfectly by the hidden microphones. "Devin needs this property to secure the funding. If you file for divorce first, the courts will freeze all the assets. Your sister will lose out on millions." I watched the real Barbara physically recoil, her hands flying up to cover her mouth in absolute horror as she listened to her own recorded voice coaching her son to commit a felony. Her perfectly curated image of the sweet, loving matriarch shattered instantly. The video continued playing. Derek's recorded voice whimpered about my trust fund, showing he knew exactly who owned the house. And then came the ultimate kill shot. The tablet broadcasted Barbara's ruthless command. "Just press the button, Derek. Be the man of this family for once. Stop letting that sterile, career-obsessed woman control your destiny." The video clearly showed Derek tapping the screen of my device, officially executing the forged digital signature. I paused the playback right as Barbara clapped her hands together in celebration. The sudden silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. The undeniable reality of their crime hung over the front lawn, an invisible weight pressing down on their chests. "There is no hacking defense here," Jonathan announced smoothly, breaking the silence. "There is no claiming someone stole your password or spoofed your internet address. We have high-definition video and pristine audio of you actively committing felony forgery and wire fraud, perfectly coordinated with the digital timestamps from the county recorder's office." Derek looked like he was going to vomit. His knees literally buckled, and he had to grab the edge of the barbecue grill to keep himself from collapsing onto the cobblestones. He looked wildly at his mother, begging her to fix the mess she had pushed him into. But Barbara was completely speechless. Her face was a mask of pure terror. Devin took a massive step away from his brother-in-law, his eyes wide with a new horrifying realization. By forging that document, Derek had poisoned the well. Devin had just used that specific forged deed to apply for a federal commercial loan. Derek's crime had instantly transformed Devin's shady business tactic into a massive federal conspiracy. The lead police officer let out a low whistle, clearly impressed by the overwhelming mountain of evidence we had just presented. He looked at his partner, gave a firm nod, and stepped decisively into the center of the driveway. He reached down to his dark utility belt and unclasped the leather pouch. The sharp metallic clinking sound of steel handcuffs being pulled free echoed loudly. Derek the officer commanded his voice, leaving absolutely no room for negotiation or argument. "Step away from the grill and put both of your hands behind your back right now." The trap had officially snapped shut, and there was absolutely no escape. The sheer gravity of the situation finally broke through Derek's denial, and a pathetic sob escaped his throat. He did not fight back as the police officer grabbed his arm and spun him around. The officer pressed Derek firmly against the warm metal hood of the black and white cruiser. The sharp click of the steel handcuffs locking around his wrists echoed through the quiet courtyard. "You are under arrest for felony forgery and wire fraud," the officer stated, his voice completely devoid of any sympathy. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Derek pressed his cheek against the hood of the car, his tears mixing with the thin layer of dust on the paint. He looked absolutely pathetic. The floral button-down shirt and khaki shorts he had worn to play the role of the wealthy tech investor now just looked like a clown costume. He kept muttering apologies, whispering my name, begging me to tell the officers it was just a massive misunderstanding. But I did not say a single word. I just stood there next to Jonathan, watching the man who had tried to steal my future get systematically stripped of his freedom. That was when Barbara completely lost her mind. The illusion of the sophisticated upper-class matriarch shattered into a million irrecoverable pieces. She let out a piercing, hysterical scream that sounded like a wounded animal. "No!" She shrieked, her face turning an angry, blotchy shade of purple. "You cannot take my son. He is a good boy. He is the man of the house." She is lying. She manipulated that video. Barbara stumbled forward, her knockoff heels sinking deeply into the soft dirt of my flower beds. She threw herself onto the manicured grass, pounding her fists against the ground in a full-blown toddler tantrum. She sobbed wildly, smearing her heavy makeup across her cheeks. It was the most undignified, humiliating display I had ever witnessed. She had spent the last 5 years lecturing me on proper etiquette and how a high society wife should behave. Now she was rolling around in the dirt on my front lawn, screaming at the top of her lungs, while her golden child was being shoved into the back of a police car. Megan rushed over to try and pull her mother up, but Barbara violently shoved her daughter away, completely consumed by her own toxic rage. Barbara's wild tear-streaked eyes locked directly onto me. The sheer panic in her expression rapidly mutated into pure, unfiltered hatred. "This is all your fault," she screamed, scrambling to her feet. "You selfish, sterile witch! You planned this! You trapped my boy!" Before anyone could react, Barbara lunged across the cobblestone driveway right toward me, her manicured fingers curled into claws aiming directly for my face. I did not flinch. I did not even take a step back. I knew exactly what was going to happen. The second police officer moved with incredible speed. He intercepted Barbara mid-stride, grabbing her aggressively by the shoulders and spinning her around. He slammed her back against the side of Devon's leased car. "Stay exactly where you are, ma'am," the officer barked, pulling a second pair of handcuffs from his belt. "If you take one more step toward this woman, I will arrest you for aggravated assault and battery on this driveway. Do you understand me?" Barbara froze, her chest heaving, as she stared at the cold steel of the cuffs. The threat of joining her son in a jail cell finally pierced through her hysterical rage, forcing her into a terrified, shaking silence. The courtyard was silent again, save for the heavy breathing of my mother-in-law and the hum of the police cruisers. I looked toward the wrought iron gates at the end of the driveway. 20 wealthy neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk. These were the same corporate executives Barbara had desperately tried to impress during her visits. Now every single one of them was holding their smartphones up, recording the humiliating spectacle in high-definition video. They captured Derek crying in the police cruiser. They were recording Barbara pinned against a car by law enforcement. The footage of their absolute destruction was going to be shared across every neighborhood group chat and social media platform before the sun even fully set. They were permanently ruined in the social circles they had sacrificed everything to conquer. Devin stood near the barbecue grill, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the disaster. He realized that the cameras were recording him too, the fake tech CEO standing next to a stolen house. The grand finale of their hostile takeover was a total documented public execution, with Derek secured in the back of the police cruiser and Barbara frozen in terrified silence against the side of the leased car. The focus of the courtyard shifted to the remaining architects of this disaster. Megan had been completely silent, pressing herself deep into the teak lounge chair, as if she could magically disappear. But as the lead officer slammed the cruiser door shut, the paralysis broke. Megan scrambled out of the chair, her oversized sunglasses clattering onto the cobblestone. She ran directly toward me, her face pale and streaked with tears. "Audrey, you have to stop this," Megan pleaded, her voice high-pitched and frantic. "You cannot let them take him away, and you cannot take this house back. We already gave up everything to move in here." I looked at her, tilting my head slightly. "Gave up everything?" I repeated, my tone completely flat. "Yes," Megan cried, waving her hands wildly. "We broke the lease on our apartment yesterday morning. We paid a massive penalty fee to get out of the contract immediately because Derek said we could have the master suite. Devin sold his car. We took every single dollar we had in our joint savings account, almost $50,000, and wired it to the lender in Nevada this afternoon." Jonathan stepped forward, his eyebrows raised. "You wired $50,000 to a hard money lender before the appraisal was even completed?" he asked. Devin finally spoke up, his voice trembling. "It was an expedition fee," he stammered. "The lender said that if we wanted the $300,000 dispersed by Tuesday to pay off the IRS tax lien, we had to wire a non-refundable premium deposit to cover the rush, underwriting, and high-risk insurance. They promised the funds were fully guaranteed because the property was worth over $2 million. I could barely comprehend the sheer magnitude of their financial incompetence. They were so desperate to cover Devin's federal tax debts and secure their fake millionaire lifestyle that they had handed over their entire life savings to a predatory lending firm based entirely on a forged document. They had practically gift-wrapped their own financial ruin. "Well, Megan," I said coldly, "I hope you kept the receipt for that wire transfer because you are never seeing a single cent of that money again." Megan let out a sharp gasp. "What do you mean?" she demanded. "The loan is guaranteed by the house. We own the house." "You own absolutely nothing," I corrected her sharply. "And that lender is not going to give you the loan either. My attorney contacted their fraud department exactly 20 minutes before we arrived here. We provided them with the security footage of Derek forging my signature, along with the undeniable proof that this property belongs to my irrevocable trust. The moment they realized your collateral was fraudulent, they canceled the loan application entirely. And since you violated the terms by submitting a forged deed, your $50,000 expedition deposit is completely forfeit." "No," Devin shouted, his voice cracking with pure desperation. "No, they cannot do that. That was everything we had. We need that money to stop the IRS from seizing my business accounts. You have to call them back." "There is no misunderstanding, Devin," I replied, looking right through his pathetic tech executive facade. "You committed federal mortgage fraud. You crossed state lines to solicit funds using a stolen property title, and you did it while actively hiding a massive federal tax lien. You really think the Nevada lender just kept your deposit and quietly closed the file? They are legally obligated to report major instances of wire fraud to federal authorities." I paused, letting the silence hang in the air for a brief second before delivering the absolute final blow. "The FBI is already looking into your limited liability company, Devin. They know exactly what you just did." The blood drained completely from Devin's face. The charismatic, arrogant posture he had used to intimidate me just minutes ago vanished entirely. His legs literally gave out beneath him. He collapsed heavily onto his knees right there on the cobblestone driveway, the sharp impact echoing loudly in the quiet courtyard. He buried his face in his hands, letting out a guttural sob as the reality of his situation crushed him. Megan fell to her knees next to him, wailing hysterically. They broke their apartment lease, sold their vehicle, and handed their life savings over to a predatory lender to facilitate a federal crime. In a matter of 24 hours, they had gone from celebrating a stolen $2.4 million villa to being homeless, completely broke, and waiting for a federal indictment. I stood over them, looking down at the absolute wreckage they had created. I stood over them, looking down at the absolute wreckage they had created. I did not offer a single word of comfort or an ounce of pity. I simply turned my back on their pathetic display, walked up the stone steps of my villa, and unlocked my heavy mahogany front door. The police spent the next hour clearing my driveway. They hauled Derek away in the back of a squad car, his head bowed in absolute defeat. Devin and Megan were forced to pack whatever fit into cheap plastic trash bags and walk off my property on foot, dragging their belongings down the asphalt. Barbara had to call a rideshare service, sobbing uncontrollably the entire time, while my neighbors eagerly filmed her humiliating retreat from their manicured lawns. The hostility was over. The purge had officially begun. Exactly 1 month later, the California sun was shining brightly through the newly restored windows of my formal dining room. The shredded silk wallpaper was completely gone, replaced by a fresh, elegant coat of designer paint that cost a fraction of what they had destroyed. The house was quiet, peaceful, and entirely mine. The legal and financial bloodbath I had unleashed upon my ex-husband and his family, however, was still actively claiming casualties on a daily basis. The natural consequences of their unbridled greed had systematically dismantled their entire lives. Let us start with Derek. In the corporate finance world, a felony arrest for forgery and wire fraud is an immediate, unforgivable death sentence for your career. The moment the local news blotter published his mugshot online, the mid-tier insurance agency he worked for fired him with absolute cause. You simply cannot sell insurance policies or handle client money when you are actively awaiting trial for a federal financial crime. His compliance licenses were permanently revoked by the state board. Because I had frozen all of my platinum credit cards, and Jonathan had formally filed for a heavily contested divorce, Derek had absolutely no access to marital capital. He could not afford a high-powered defense attorney to negotiate a plea deal. He was assigned an overworked public defender who flatly told him his best option was to plead guilty and beg the federal judge for a reduced prison sentence. He currently spends his days sitting in a dingy rented room, waiting to find out exactly how many years he will serve in a federal penitentiary. Devin and Megan experienced a much faster, far more brutal descent into absolute poverty. The Internal Revenue Service does not wait for criminal trials to collect their outstanding debts. Once the federal tax lien was fully activated, the government swooped in and froze every single bank account tied to Devin and his fake limited liability company. The $50,000 they had foolishly wired to the predatory lender was permanently seized as material evidence in the ongoing federal mortgage fraud investigation. They were instantly rendered completely destitute. With no apartment, no car, and zero liquid assets to their names, they had to beg a distant relative for a small cash loan just to secure basic housing. They are currently living in a dilapidated, single-wide trailer, parked in a dusty, unforgiving lot, 2 hours outside of Los Angeles. Devin spends his days dodging relentless phone calls from federal investigators, while Megan, who once bragged about renovating my multi-million-dollar estate with a sledgehammer, now has to walk down a dirt road to a communal laundry room just to wash her clothes. And then there was Barbara. For a woman who valued high society appearances above absolutely everything else, her punishment was perhaps the most poetic. The high-definition video of her hysterical rolling tantrum on my front lawn spread through her elite social circle like a virus. The wealthy neighbors who witnessed the spectacle shared the footage with everyone they knew at the local country club. She was instantly excommunicated from her weekly luncheons. Her friends blocked her phone number and ignored her emails. She became an absolute pariah, completely ostracized by the very people she had spent decades trying to impress. Without the generous monthly allowance I used to secretly provide, Barbara could no longer afford her upscale apartment lease or her knockoff designer jewelry. She was forced to abruptly downsize into a cramped one-bedroom unit in a highly undesirable neighborhood. She is currently facing a misdemeanor charge for attempting to fence my stolen vintage furniture, a permanent stain on her previously pristine public record. They had gambled everything they had on the arrogant assumption that I would simply surrender my wealth to keep the peace. They thought my silence was a sign of weakness. They thought my patience was a form of submission. But in the world of high-stakes corporate acquisitions, the quietest people in the room are always the most dangerous. I took a slow sip of my black coffee and opened my laptop. The divorce papers were ready to be finalized, the property title was completely secure, and my consulting firm had just landed another massive, lucrative contract. The hostile takeover had been successfully repelled. I had officially liquidated the toxic assets from my life, and my future had never looked brighter. But as I sat in that freshly painted dining room, looking out over the pristine courtyard where my ex-husband had been arrested, I realized something fundamental. The Calabasas villa was fully secure, the title was ironclad, and the invaders had been permanently expelled. Yet the space itself felt irreparably tainted. Every time I walked past the marble kitchen island, I pictured Devon arrogantly leaning against it. Every time I looked at the front gates, I remembered Barbara throwing her humiliating tantrum in the dirt. In the corporate restructuring world, we have a very specific protocol for dealing with a compromised asset. You do not hold on to something just because you won the battle to keep it. If an asset no longer serves your ultimate vision, you liquidate it and reinvest the capital into a stronger portfolio. So I called a highly exclusive off-market real estate broker. I listed the $2.4 million villa, quietly, completely bypassing the public listing services to avoid any lingering drama from my newly impoverished in-laws. It sold in exactly 4 days to an international tech executive who paid in cash, giving me a 20% profit over the current market value. I packed my designer wardrobe, my remaining vintage furniture, and my financial documents, and I left the suburbs behind forever. I took the newly liquidated capital from my trust and purchased a sprawling, ultra-modern penthouse right in the heart of downtown Los Angeles. It is a stunning architectural masterpiece in the sky. It features floor-to-ceiling glass walls overlooking the glittering city skyline, a private elevator that requires biometric fingerprint scanning to operate, and absolutely zero guest bedrooms. It is a sleek, impenetrable fortress designed entirely for my peace of mind. There is no space for uninvited family members, no yard for obnoxious barbecue parties, and no unauthorized access. It is my absolute sanctuary, my personal victory translated directly into my professional life. The intense surgical precision I used to dismantle Derek and his family did not distract me from my career. In fact, the sheer adrenaline of the legal warfare sharpened my corporate instincts to an entirely new level. Over the next 6 months, I aggressively negotiated 3 massive corporate mergers back-to-back, generating unprecedented revenue for my firm. The senior board members recognized my absolute ruthlessness and officially elevated me to a full equity partner. I now hold a permanent seat at the highest table, commanding a massive corner office that looks down over the very city I completely conquered. If you take one crucial lesson away from my entire ordeal, let it be this. Never let the concept of family become a free pass for financial abuse, emotional manipulation, or blatant disrespect. A marriage certificate does not automatically entitle an insecure partner to the wealth you bled to build. A shared last name does not give toxic relatives the right to invade your sanctuary and demand your resources. Protect your assets with absolute, unapologetic aggression. Establish ironclad boundaries and enforce them without a single ounce of mercy. If you are entering a partnership with significant capital, hire a ruthless attorney. Build an irrevocable trust. Draft an airtight prenuptial agreement. Do not ever let the temporary illusion of romance blind you to the very real, highly destructive threat of human greed. Arrogant, entitled people will smile directly to your face while quietly plotting to dismantle your life, entirely convinced they deserve your hard-earned success simply because they exist in your proximity. When people show you exactly who they are and what they want from you, you must believe them the very first time. Do not negotiate with emotional terrorists. Do not try to buy their loyalty. Liquidate them from your life immediately, secure your perimeter, and move forward without a single drop of guilt. You owe them absolutely nothing. If you enjoyed this story of absolute legal destruction and corporate-style revenge, make sure to hit that like button right now. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story of entitled people getting exactly the harsh reality check they deserve. Drop a comment below and let me know exactly how you would have handled Derek, Devin, and Barbara if they tried to steal your home. Would you have called the police immediately, or would you have set a legal trap just like I did? Let me know your thoughts. Until next time, keep your boundaries incredibly strict. Keep your financial assets heavily protected, and never let anyone make you feel like a guest in your own life.